And he's going to be in the flow of wherever he needs to go with us in this journey of forgiveness. But I just honor that he's with us. And I love this man more profoundly and deeply than he can ever know. Edward Miller.
Oh, thank you, Charles. Thank you, Charles. You know, we're talking about forgiveness tonight. And I wanted to say that there's a word that is the most prof, we talk about profanity, things that are mean and hurtful and cause anxiety when people say this profanity. You know, they say, you call people names, but the biggest profanity I can think of is should. Should is a delusionary word. It gets you caught up in a reality that's only imagined. And when we live in that imagined reality, we suffer as a result of it's not being the truth. We suffer in that because we're continually imagining something that is different than what it is. And we need to start learning to be very present and be very clear when we're getting caught up in the story of should or shouldn't. You know, we need to free ourselves of that in forgiveness. And I want to start out with that. And then I want to go to what we're going to be talking about tonight. Um, I've had a trauma lately, but it isn't a personal trauma, but it's from a wonderful best friend of mine that I've had since I was 19 years old. And just a short thing is that he was in a car accident and he hit a pedestrian. And today I found out they died. So my beloved friend, my brother, is in trauma right now. And I woke up this morning feeling that, all of that energy. I felt all, I still feel it now. So I wanted to kind of take this evening and talk about trauma and how, and by the way, I'm not the only one that's in trauma. We're all facing trauma. We're all facing trauma. And what I want to present tonight is some ways in order to handle trauma, some ways in order to respond to it, in order to heal it on another level. So we're gonna watch a video, and then we're gonna get into some discussion, and then we're gonna end the evening with a video I found out about the trauma of the news today. You know, many of us are traumatized in the daily news. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but the video will give you some tools to even manage and explore that. So why don't we just get started with the first video, and then we'll get into some discussion, and then we'll get into the second video, and then we'll end out with just some discussion there. But I am expecting some discussion because I know all these sensitive, aware beings that are on this call tonight have experienced trauma. And I want to, the best way to help to heal trauma is with empathy, with understanding each other, with relating to each other and what we've experienced and what we've had to bear. So let's get started with the video and we'll go from there.
Have you ever been told to just move on or get over it after experiencing something traumatic? If you have, you know that it's not that simple. Trauma isn't just a bad memory that we can choose to forget or a wound that heals naturally over time. It's much more complex than that, affecting both the mind and the body in profound ways. I'm Dr. Tracy Marks, a psychiatrist, and I make mental health education videos. Today, I want to talk about why trauma isn't just something you can just get over and why understanding the science behind it is essential for healing. When we talk about trauma, we're not just talking about the event itself, but the lingering impact that it has on your brain and body. To understand why trauma is so hard to get over, we first need to look at what happens in the brain and body when we experience something traumatic. Trauma is a complex psychological and physiological response to experiences that overwhelm a person's capacity to cope. It's often associated with a single life-threatening event like accidents or assaults, but trauma can also result from prolonged exposure to chronic stressors such as abuse, neglect, or systemic oppression. Psychologically, trauma occurs when an event or a series of events profoundly impacts a person's sense of safety, identity, and worldview. It's important to note that trauma is subjective. What's traumatic for one person may not be for another, depending on factors like personal history, support systems, and neurobiological resilience. I talk more about how to build up your resilience in another video that I'll have linked in this video. When you experience trauma, several key areas of your brain are impacted. The amygdala, often referred to as the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. This heightened state of alertness is why trauma survivors often feel anxious or on edge even when there's no immediate danger. The amygdala remains in a constant state of vigilance, scanning for potential threats and making it hard to relax or feel safe. Your hippocampus, which is central to forming and retrieving memories, can actually shrink in response to trauma. And this structural change affects how memories are stored and recalled, which is why people with trauma often experience fragmented, distorted, or intrusive memories of the event. And traumatic memories don't get processed the same way that other memories do. Instead, they get stuck and resurface as vivid flashbacks or nightmares. Then there's the prefrontal cortex, which is normally responsible for rational thinking, decision-making, and impulse control. Trauma survivors have reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, making it difficult to regulate emotions, concentrate, or make decisions, especially in stressful situations. Trauma doesn't just affect the mind, it affects the body as well. When we experience trauma, our body's natural response is to activate our fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is a natural survival mechanism. And this response results in the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones prepare us to either confront the threat, escape from it, or become immobilized if we have no other options. But if you've experienced trauma, this stress response can become chronically activated, even when the immediate threat has passed. And this is where trauma becomes stored, if you will, in your body. This persistent release of stress hormones can lead to a range of physical symptoms, including muscle tension, chronic pain, digestive issues, and fatigue. Trauma survivors often report they feel perpetually exhausted, on edge, or trapped in an endless cycle of stress. Trauma changes your brain and body in ways that are hard to reverse without targeted interventions. But the concept of neuroplasticity offers hope. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new neural connections. By the way, when I was in residency in the late 1990s, we still believed that the brain was largely fixed and unchangeable. How depressing is that? It's only been in the last 25 years that the concept of neuroplasticity has been fleshed out with advances in neuroimaging, and now it's fundamental to our understanding of how the brain works. So the ability to change the brain can go both ways. Trauma can create maladaptive pathways and shrink brain regions, but there are several treatment approaches that can allow for healing the brain from trauma through adaptive rewiring. Let's look at some evidence-based therapies for trauma. One such therapy is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. EMDR is a therapy that involves processing traumatic memories by stimulating both sides of your brain, usually through guided eye movements. This process helps to rewire the brain's response to traumatic memories by reducing their emotional intensity. It allows the brain to reintegrate the memories without the same emotional overwhelm. Another highly effective method is trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. This CBT works by helping you identify and change unhelpful thought patterns and behaviors associated with your trauma. Trauma-focused CBT includes exposure therapy, where you gradually face the trauma memories or situations in a controlled and safe manner. This gradual exposure desensitizes you to the experiences that trigger anxiety, and your anxiety reduces over time. Somatic therapies are also gaining recognition in trauma treatment. Unlike therapies that mainly focus on thoughts and emotions, somatic therapies focus on the body. Techniques like somatic experiencing and sensory motor psychotherapy work on the premise that trauma is stored not just in the mind, but in your body's nervous system. And these therapies involve tuning into physical sensations in the body to release stored tension and calm the body's stress response. These therapies help restore a sense of safety and physical self-awareness, allowing trauma survivors to reconnect with their bodies in a healthier, more integrated way. This outcome is called embodiment and is an important aspect of trauma recovery because being able to tune into and understand your bodily sensations helps with recognizing and managing emotional responses to stress. I know that's a lot. Let me say that again. In order to manage your emotional and physical stress response, you need to get good at being able to tune in to your body's sensations and reactions. Mind-body practices like mindfulness, yoga, and breath work also help cultivate a sense of embodiment. Mindfulness involves staying present with your experiences without judgment. For trauma survivors, mindfulness helps reduce anxiety and improve emotional regulation by training the brain to remain anchored in the present rather than getting swept away with traumatic memories or worries. Yoga has also been shown to help release tension stored in the body and promote relaxation. Specifically, trauma-informed yoga focuses on creating a safe space for participants, allowing them to reconnect with their bodies and regain a sense of control. Similarly, breathwork techniques like deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing can help calm the autonomic nervous system, reducing the body's fight or flight response and promoting a state of rest and healing. Another important aspect of trauma recovery is practicing self-compassion. Healing from trauma is rarely a linear process. There will be good days and bad days, and you have to treat yourself with kindness rather than judgment. Self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering is a part of the human experience and that you have to treat yourself with the same care that you would offer a loved one. Research shows that self-compassion can reduce the negative effects of trauma by promoting emotional resilience and reducing feelings of shame or self-blame. Simple practices like journaling, spending time in nature, or engaging in creative outlets can be forms of self-care and support healing. Journaling, for example, can provide an outlet to process and release difficult emotions. Nature walks can promote relaxation and provide a grounding experience, helping to soothe the nervous system. By combining evidence-based therapies with mind-body practices and self-compassion, trauma survivors can have multiple options for healing. Trauma is a complex experience that requires equally complex strategies to heal. But the good news is that with the right support and interventions, it's possible to rewire your brain and body toward resilience and recovery. Watch this video for more on how trauma affects our memories. Thanks for watching today. See you next time. Have you ever been told to just move on or
Okay, trauma occurs when an event or series of events profoundly impact a person's sense of safety. And I want you guys to kind of look at this and reflect on the safety, identity, and worldview. How is trauma subjective? The impact of traumatic event is deeply personal, meaning that everybody sees life differently and influenced by individual factors rather than solely the event themselves. I mean, we all can relate to people who have been affected by things in ways that wouldn't have affected us in the same way, or we could see that we were affected in ways that other people may have not even dealt with at all. And all of that is the reason why trauma is absolutely a subjective process. And how is trauma stored in the body? Now, trauma in all of us, and I want you to just imagine this trauma is stored in our body and our muscles. It's some of us have chronic pain, some of us have digestive issues, fatigue, perpetual exhaustion, and endless stress. These are things that we all can relate to. So I want to be able to talk now a little bit about people's experiences with trauma before we get into the final video. Charles, some of the techniques that they talked about that I want you to kind of talk about is your experience with trauma therapy.
I opened to EMDR therapy this past year, last March, and I can tell you that I have gained more insight and had breakthroughs that were more significant than anything in all my years that I've ever experienced. And based upon the reality that trauma, grief, loss that has not been felt in a manner and way in which you've been able to cleanse and clear significantly stays in the body.
Yes.
It and you don't know and understand how deeply rooted it is. And I didn't. I had no idea, but I knew that earlier last year I was having reactive reactions that made no sense, that made me very, very angry. And I was triggered by certain words that were, I took them in so personally. And I was not always hearing what someone meant when they said what they did, because I would pick up on a word and I would take it in such a way that it was reflecting history of pain and trauma that I hadn't recognized. And I'm grateful
How
for
did how did this practice
mm,
align with your thoughts about forgiveness or self-forgiveness?
it enables you to do and realize and release the grief that you've stored, that you had no idea how deep it was. And EMDR, there's two ways. There's not only the eye movement. My therapist, he does that, but with me, I have like two buzzers in my hand that I hold, and he controls them, but he leads me into, and this is not every session. Every session is not an overwhelming thing, thank God. But that,
There has to be processing too, I guess.
exactly. But he will lead me into a trauma that clearly is bringing up deep emotion and feelings, and I'm to identify where it is in the body as fully as I can. But then he leads me for me to just keep speaking on it, talking on it, feeling it, allowing it, and he's pushing me. He is controlling the buzzers and the frequency, and what it's doing is it's impacting my brain waves. I mean, it's incredible. It's impacting my left and right brain, and it's enabling me to come up with another perception,
There you go.
with another
Yeah.
perception of it, that
Yes.
I can carry that forward as opposed to the depth of the trauma and pain and unforgiveness that I have felt about myself and others. And I've been able to see it in a way that again is astounding. It's beyond defining what it's done for me. It's huge.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me tell you a little bit about my path toward dealing with trauma. You know, 20 years ago, I was in the middle of my business, which was a big business, and I had a lot of responsibility on me, but my body was contracting. I was in pain all the time. I didn't really know. I was looking for solutions out in the world for my pain, and I was trying every technique and every medicine to get rid of my pain, and I actually decided to have surgery. that was the biggest mistake of my life. I had them cut on me in order to make me better. Well, not only did it not make me better, it made me worse. And I had to stop looking outside of me for where this pain was, the root of this pain. I had to start looking inside. And that's when I discovered the Ho'oponopono. And the Ho'oponopono, as the woman talked about in the video, is a compassionate, self-compassion relationship. It's learning to be introspective and explore your feelings and explore your resistance. And in the process of doing that, I started seeing my past differently. I started having new relationships with my parents and my family, seeing myself differently. And the Ho'oponopono to me has been a progression because I so drilled it into my consciousness that I'm always in forgiveness, love, gratitude mode. I'm always trying to, explore life from that mantra, which is I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and thank you. It has changed me so much that now I'm more sensitive, I'm more introspective, but what most of all is I'm more aware of myself. And that's been a very powerful tool in keeping me available and having me love deeply and having me feel my more emotional self. Like I was telling you today that I was feeling my emotions so deeply today. And it doesn't feel comfortable. I'm uncomfortable right now, but I'm blessed to be able to have access to this level of my emotional self that I wouldn't have access to if I hadn't done the introspection and the internal work, the awareness work. So can anybody else relate to this from the standpoint of what they've been through and how awareness and forgiveness gave them a new perspective on themselves and the world?
Edward, real quickly, the depth of that surgery kept you in a wheelchair for a significant period of time, didn't it?
It did. I couldn't walk.
Yeah.
All I could really do is get in the pool and walk the pool. Because the pool is a place where you're not putting so much weight on your body. So I just walked the pool. And one day I met a lady, and she was a senior citizen, and she kept bugging me about what are you doing? Why are you doing it like that? Why are because I was trying to swim. And I said, okay, what's going on here? Well, this woman, who was, I think she must have been like 85 at the time, taught me to swim. And swimming changed my life because it gave me a tool to process. Charles was talking about we need to process. We can stay in our head and with our trauma all the time, or we can let the energy process, allow ourselves to feel it intensely. Because if we don't feel it intensely, we're busy guarding it and suppressing it in our bodies. And our bodies have aches and pains and stress and dis-ease, and it's bearing all of our trauma. So can anybody else relate to that? Because I think this is important discussion. I think we need to understand these patterns because we all have the same patterns. Marcy?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, um, if I can back up, I think the first thing that I want to say is I am really glad that you are talking about this. And I landed in a forensic psychologist's office about 12 years ago because something so horrific had happened. And if it ever went to court, I was going to need someone to prove, what was the damage that was done and that what this person did. I mean, it was horrendous. I mean, absolutely horrendous. Um, I left his office, and this was a man who had worked with people that had been to Abu Ghraib and had experienced the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. And he looked at me and he said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I thought I had heard it all. But after he gave me all these tests and the results were, she's not lying. She's totally telling the truth. She was a whole intact person before this thing happened. Um, and it was the worst case of complex PTSD that he had ever seen in the testing. And then um, uh, he said all of the damage that is showing up is due to what this person did to her, which was all very validating. Of course, I was like, well, duh, of course. Anyway, but I think what I'm trying to say in this moment, in my backed up place, is I would then go to New Thought churches, and for years, I just couldn't even walk into them because I would go in and it was all like the love and the light, and if you just think your way, like
Yeah, 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 the law of attraction crap. Excuse
like
my. Yes, I hear you.
yeah, it was like the world that I had been thrust into no longer met with New Thought, and I went. It was just one more chasm, one more fracture. So I love that you're bringing this because, and I love that in general, there are places in New Thought where people are catching up to, you can't just put a band-aid of think your life, like all the stuff, like,
I hear you. Yes, yes.
okay, so I just want to thank you. I want to thank you.
Hearing that.
Um, One thing that I will say, just to flesh out the definition of trauma too, is that it has to do with a kind of window of tolerance. You know, uh,
Yes,
as long as the sympathetic and parasympathetic are functioning here, there's difficulty, and everyone goes through difficulty. Trauma, though, is when it is that the functioning of the nervous system goes above this level and
yes, yes.
come down because of the assaultive nature that keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening that the person has no control over, and they're trapped, whether it's attachment wounds or whether it's or in an abuse, whatever it is. So it's prolonged. It's not just difficult experiences. That's its own thing, but trauma is a different category. Yeah. And the last thing that I'll say too is I always get a little like with the subject of forgiveness. In general, I'm coming back to a place like I'm a big Yeshua lover, and I'm studying with Neil Douglas Klotz right now, the Aramaic Jesus, and it's all about like unbinding the knots.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so from that perspective, I'm like, oh, Jesus is talking about a different reality that we can put ourselves in and
Yes.
not dependent on whether there was ever an apology or like all that kind of stuff. So I'm just kind of naming things that are part of my
Well,
zeitgeist.
let me ask you a personal question. How has music been a tool that you use to help you move through energy and resolve trauma?
Oh gosh, I can sense in the subtlety that you're looking for an answer that's like, here's how.
No, no, no. I'm wondering I'm not looking for you to
Okay, okay,
how
okay.
does it affect you? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because voice has been the place where I both have found a place to thrive and where the trauma is. I got into music because I couldn't talk.
Mm.
I wasn't allowed to speak as a child. And so it was like I was so traumatized there, but then it was like there was this switch and I could flip into a place of making music because that world made sense. Like I would plunk a piano key and the way that things would resonate, I would go, this is an underlying harmony. Why can't the world just be like this?
There
So
you go.
off sometime like when I sing, I'm really working with this because I can easily dissociate when I sing, and I can also simultaneously be more present than ever.
Yes.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is that my music has always served this function of opening different worlds for people. Like this isn't the only world there is. There are all these other worlds. And
Yes.
partly I naturally lived there. Like I was this girl who at 13 was reading Life After Life about the near-death experiences and going, I knew it. I know this is real, And at the same time, trauma dissociated me so much that that kind of world was the only one that was safe. And
Oh,
so when I sing, it's like it reinvokes both the safety and the traumatic dissociation where you split off from yourself. So I'm really working on, and people will be like, "Oh my God, you took me to another world," and I'll be like, "I'm glad it was good for you. I don't remember." So it's like, oh, I'm trapped by my own gift, you know? Anyway, so I'm really working. I'm working it out. I'm working it out.
I hear that. I hear that. And thank you for working it out for all of us. Yeah.
Did that make sense? And I hope I didn't talk too
No,
long.
he did not, but I'm gonna ask Susie because Susie always has insight and perspective, and I wanted to get her thoughts on this.
Got it.
You have to, Susie, you're gonna have to unmute. Susie?
Are you saying Susan or Susie?
Susie. Yes, you.
And so what do you want me to say?
I'm saying you always have insight and enlightened perspective, and I want to get your thoughts on this.
I don't know. I don't know what I think. I don't know.
You want me to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you at least being aware and but I do want you to process from what we're talking about too. So I'm sure sometime you're going to share it with us. Susan.
Wow. Okay, where are we at? There was a lot of things going through my mind. I'm a lot different now than I used to be. And part of that is growing and changing and learning. But also a lot of it was I felt like I always needed to please other people. I wanted other people to like me. I didn't think about too much what I wanted or what was important to me. It was always looking for that pat on the back, that nice word, or oh, I'm glad you're here, and that kind of stuff. And I guess a lot of that had to do, when I look back at it now, I really didn't like what I was told my life was going to be like when I grew up. I mean, I didn't like what they were telling me. So I just went out there and tried the best way I knew how to change it. But in jumping out there like I did, I got a lot more than I bargained for. But eventually, everybody has their path. And eventually, I got the things that were important to me in my life. So it just because you're on a path and it doesn't seem to be going where you want it to go, and it doesn't bring you all the things you want it to bring, hang in there.
Hang in there.
This is not like a one act play here.
Yes.
We have opportunities and chances, no matter how bad things may have been or how much you feel like you haven't accomplished. There's always more ahead of you if you can just resolve the conflict that's going on in your mind at the present time, which is not always easy.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, for me, I wanted to go to college when I was junior in high school. And my father told me he said, "Do you want to be a teacher?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you want to be a nurse?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, then there isn't any reason for you to go to college. Only women go to college that aren't going to be a nurse or a teacher. They just find somebody there and get married and drop out anyway." So I tried to go in another way. I wanted, they had these people, comes around to the school and give different talks. And this was a Navy recruiter. It was a wave. And I thought, wow, if you join the waves, you can go into the Navy and you can get your education, girl. And I thought, oh, wow. I was so excited. I had all the paperwork. I took it home to my father and he said, girls don't go in the service. That's for men. I thought, so I got married at 17.
Oh,
Got out of the house, had a husband, and then had a child. And well, that, I thought that was going to be my life. But, things, it's never over till it's over.
it's never
I
over.
guess I would say that to a lot of people because I'm doing things now that I just truly love. I mean, when Charles met me, I was starting to do some of those things. He came when I graduated from college at 66 years old. I mean, it's, and I look at people now. There's people now that are in their 80s and people are telling them, hey, it's not too late. What didn't you do that you wanted to do? You thought you should be doing. And they're out there trying and doing it. I mean,
I love that. I love that.
Don't let people tell you what you can do.
Yes.
If there's something that you want to do, try it.
Try it.
If it doesn't work out, well, then try something else, but just don't give up on yourself. I think a lot of us at some point in our life have done that. We've just given up, let other people make our life or tell us what our life was. And the sooner you can get over that, the better your life is going to be. You don't have to wait till you're my age to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, Susan. Listen, I want to get to the final video.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and we're doing this as two-parter, so we can carry on next week on this too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's been a rough weekend for Ukraine and the world. The news coming out of there is painful and scary to watch, and I know it's affecting a lot of people. Over the weekend, one of my friends posted about how the news was making her anxious and discouraged and overwhelmed, and I know that's the experience for so many of you kind, sensitive people. It's stressful to care, but even more than that, our brilliant brain believes that we're in danger when we read about other people who are. So in this video, we're going to talk about how your brain has a reptilian reaction to the news and how this can mess up your life. And you're going to learn 4 ways you can actively manage your brain so that the news doesn't make you depressed or overwhelmed with anxiety. Okay, so the first thing to understand is how news organizations take advantage of your brain. For-profit news organizations don't care about presenting both sides of the story. They care about activating your amygdala. They're taking advantage of the survival part of your brain. The reptilian part of your brain is constantly scanning the world for threats. It wants to survive, so it's watching for the smallest sign of danger to kick on that fight, flight, freeze response. Now, your brain has a counterbalancing rest and digest response, but those 2 responses aren't identical. The threat response is way more sensitive than the rest and digest response. And that makes sense. If you're a lizard, right? It's more important to notice any sign of a hawk that might eat you than it is to notice every single bug that you could eat, right? Basically, your brain scans the world for threats and it highlights them and it zooms in on them. It has a stronger, I have to look reaction to threats than it does to things that are safe. And so news organizations, they take advantage of this by publishing scary and sensational and tragic stories because your reptile brain wants you to click on those. And the more you click, the more money they make from ads. But by making sensational negative news stories, they're making us more anxious, more scared, and more depressed. Now, I'm not saying this to minimize the tragedy that's happening and the war that's happening. I'm saying this so that you're an informed consumer and you can make choices about how to use your brain as you read the news. So if you aren't intentional, you'll let news organizations take advantage of your ancient brain by allowing them to constantly trigger your danger response, which is going to make you more anxious and actually less prepared to take intelligent or helpful action to be safe. Now, anxiety serves a function, right? It keeps us safe from real and present danger, but we have to keep our anxiety in check by asking, is how I'm seeing things accurate? Or am I in actual danger? And then we have to make a choice about how to respond. Now, the second thing here, right, is we need to get perspective. Now, when I say this next part, you're probably gonna have a strong emotional reaction, so just watch for it. But the world is actually getting safer over time. But no one feels that way, right? On average, life expectancy is up, child mortality is down, global income inequality is down, more people are living in democracies, conflicts are on the decline. Massive gains have been made in reducing poverty and slavery, right? Literacy is up. More people have access to healthcare than ever in the history of the world, right? Global education continues to improve. Less kids get kidnapped than ever. But 9 out of 10 people think that the world is getting more dangerous, that it's getting worse every day. And that's mostly because of the news media and how we choose to read stories that highlight the bad things happening. So when's the last time you read a story titled, "Hey, there's less war on average lately," or "Less kids are dying these days from polio," or "No one got kidnapped in our state this month," right? These stories don't get published because they don't get clicked on as much, because they don't trigger that urgency in our brain the same way stories about tragedies do. Now, I'm not saying this to minimize what's happening. I'm not saying this to say like, oh, there's no war, nothing bad is happening. That bad things are happening. Yeah. If you just let your circumstances or news media or your ancient fear-based brain, your survival-based brain decide what you're going to pay attention to, then you're going to be constantly stressed out and depressed. Now, because our brain is naturally attuned to see threats, we have to intentionally choose to see the good in the world as well. So this looks like daily gratitude practice. It looks like speaking about the good in the world. It looks like following positive sources like Upworthy or the Good News Movement, so that you can see, in addition to the tragedies and war, also the positive gains that we are making as a global society. So again, I'm not saying you should just ignore the problem. I'm not trying to minimize how bad things are for many people right now. But I'm just saying we need to intentionally choose where we're going to put our attention. And you can choose to run your brain instead of letting fear run you. And the way you do that is by choosing where you put your attention. So I want you to ask yourself this question, right? If I were to plan out my day minute by minute, how much time would I choose to spend consuming the news? Now, this answer may be different for an international diplomat, a political science professor, a NASA engineer, or a car mechanic, right? A politician may intentionally choose to read the news 10 hours a day. But I think for most people, if we were intentional about it, we might choose a smaller percentage of our day to give our attention to the news. So be intentional, right? I strongly recommend that you don't start your day laying in bed reading or watching the news. This is like asking to prime your day for anxiety, right? Plan in a time and a place where you'll get informed each day, like maybe at lunch or in the afternoon. And then also choose an educational, not a sensational source of news. So I strongly recommend against cable news, and I would recommend a source like the AP, NPR, or the BBC. Okay, next, don't let social media determine when and how long you watch the news, right? We used to have to go out and buy a newspaper and sit down and open it up and read it if we wanted to know the news. But now stories pop up in my social media feeds whether I want to see them or not. So set time limits on your social media use and show the algorithm what you do and what you don't want to see, right? You can unfollow channels that are sensational or really negative or dramatic, right? Your brain and the social media algorithm are very similar, actually. They show you more of what you pay attention to. So I've intentionally tailored my Instagram feed. My Instagram is where I go for things that are funny. So I basically click not interested in anything negative or stressful on my Instagram. So I can just watch cat videos there. And when I want to learn something, I go to YouTube or I go to NPR or BBC, right? And if I just want to see cat videos, I go to Instagram. Okay? Next, when we're getting sucked into all this negativity, all these news stories, right? We need to practice constantly shifting our attention back to what we do want our lives to be about. What do you want to be focused on? Do you want to spend hours every day thinking about the news? If that's your job, maybe yes. But if it's not your job, maybe you want to be paying attention to your kids or your friends or your job or your family, right? Pay attention to your values, what you want your life to be about, and what you actually value and give your time to that, not just reading all the news all the time. You manage anxiety by doing the locus of control activity. So clarity and action are antidotes to anxiety. So grab a piece of paper, right? What can you do about the crisis in Ukraine? Here's a bunch of options, right? You can get informed, you can educate yourself on the political situation and the history of the conflict there. You can advocate, right? You can advocate for a stance you care about. You can call your elected representative and you can encourage them to take action. You can protest. You can vote for wise leaders. You can pray for the people in Ukraine. You can send money. You can get involved in aid organizations, or you can support refugees. You could fly over there and get involved physically, right? I'm not saying all of these are good ideas. We're just brainstorming here. You can encourage other people to get involved, right? You can do that through social media. I mean, I've seen soccer players and soccer teams doing this. You can, make posts and stuff like that to encourage other people to get more informed, or tell other people where you stand. Another actionable step, you could decrease your dependence on Russian oil by living a more eco-friendly life. And you could put your own life in order, right? You could make an emergency fund. You could prepare some emergency supplies. You could be the change that you want to see in the world by being kinder, by solving problems peaceably, by standing up for what's right. If everyone in the world tried to be a little bit kinder, the whole world would be better. But even when only one person does it, it makes a difference and it spreads. Or instead of taking action, you could just think about problems over and over all day and doom scroll for hours every day without doing anything. Now, in my opinion, if you're just going to read the news and never take any action, it's better to not even be informed. So spend some time doing a locus of control activity. What actions would you choose to take based on the information you're consuming? Okay, caring about the world, caring about people means that you want to be informed and that you're gonna feel things when you see other people suffer. But be intentional about where you put your focus. Choose how you consume the news and transform your anxiety into action. I hope you find this helpful. Thank you for watching, and take care.